it's not about eat this, not eat that, the black and white rigid rules. It's more really taking into account the individual's values around food, what's important to them, and what feels good to them and what feels manageable to them to do in regards to nutrition.
That was Registered Dietitian and Nutritionist Nicole Giumarra. Nicole Giumarra is a Registered Dietitian Nutritionist with an MS in Nutrition Scientist, specializing in sports nutrition, eating disorders, prediabetes, and cardiovascular disease. Nicole has worked in a variety of settings, including acute and long-term care, and currently sees clients in her private practice here in Bakersfield. In today's episode with Nicole, we talked about intuitive eating, what it is, how you do it, how it may benefit one's health and well-being, and her non-diet weight neutral approach to nutrition counseling with clients. We talked about nutrition for children, why BMI is not a good indicator for her for health, same with weight. We talked a lot about the big business that is dieting and how they market to people to, simply with a message of decreasing your body size and her different approach to that. Very educated, very smart, very enjoyable person to be around. Highly recommend listening to today's show, and definitely recommend that you go see her if this is something that you are working on in your health journey. Today, Nicole Giumarra, Registered Dietitian and Nutritionist, is on the R2 podcast. And just a quick little disclaimer, this episode is not intended to give medical or nutritional advice. This is a discussion we had with her opinions, her approach. Obviously, if you have your own physician or nutritionist, to listen and follow their instructions and enjoy this for what it is, and that is just a conversation. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Our 2 Cents podcast, the show where your local professionals sit down with an array of guests to hear their story and impart some wisdom for both business and life-improving skills. This is your place to hear business and community leaders discuss relevant topics that matter to you.
And welcome back to the R2 Cents podcast. Today, Kyle Jones will be your host, and I am joined in the studio by Nicole Giumarra. But before we get to the interview, I want to encourage our listeners to go back and follow us on Instagram and to follow and subscribe to our podcast, which you can find on Apple, iTunes, Podcasts, Spotify, pretty much anywhere where they exist. Nicole, good to see you again. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Welcome back again. We had you on, I think I went back and looked. You were episode number 70. I think, and we're around 128 now, so about 50 weeks ago, roughly, because we do one every week, so time has kind of flown by.
Yeah, it has.
How's business been?
Really busy.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been good.
Are you doing a lot of marketing or word of mouth? What's your
A lot of word of mouth. I hate to admit, but I don't do a ton of marketing. I have a website. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, but really most of my clients come from either doctor referrals or word of mouth. With the pandemic, I'm seeing much bigger increase in clients with eating disorders, which I think follows some of the general trends that we've seen just nationwide and probably even worldwide with the increase of eating disorders across all age ranges, but particularly in adolescents. I'm seeing more of those clients, doing a little bit more sports nutrition, which is kind of a personal passion of mine. So yeah, things have been really good.
Yeah, it seems like with a physician referral, that's probably somebody who's in, I want to say bad shape, but someone who is really in need of your service compared to maybe the sports nutrition where you're dealing with already highly finely tuned athletes and you're just trying to kind of give them that little extra boost. Would that be fair?
Yeah, more or less. So the physician referrals will generally be people that, have high cholesterol. Maybe they got a new diagnosis of diabetes, hypertension, that sort of thing. And then, like you said, athletes already sort of have those, maybe you're pretty healthy otherwise, and they're training for an event. But I do have some athletes too that are training for things, but also are, do have some other health concerns that need to be taken into consideration as well.
Okay.
Kind of get a mix of everything.
We're going to obviously go over your bio before the show even starts and people are going to know who you are, but give us a little background, if you would, about your education experience and what you do exactly.
So I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist. I have a master's degree in nutrition sciences. I am in private practice right now. So I see clients in my office individually for nutrition counseling. And, my work experience in the past, I've worked in hospitals, long-term care centers, adult daycare center. So I've kind of done a little bit of everything in that regard. But now I'm just a solo practitioner.
Do you like having your own shingle and practicing for your own self?
I do. It does afford a little bit more flexibility in my schedule. I also have 3 kids,
yes.
2 of which are in high school, and they were playing all 3 are playing different sports right now. So life is kind of crazy. And
a little hectic there.
I have my own personal athletic pursuits. I'm training for triathlons. So I like to, make sure that I have time to do that every day. And so, yeah, I do like having my own gig, so to speak, so that I can schedule clients, somewhat to my convenience, but I do end up working a pretty normal 9 to 5.
Well, I was going to say, it's nice to have that flexibility, but when you're a sole prop, you also wear many different hats, right? You're the biller, you're the scheduler, you're the janitor.
Yes.
I guess you kind of do everything.
Yeah. In fact, today I didn't have any client appointments, but it was all scheduling and billing and catching up on my charting.
Right. Exactly. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. I always tell people who I'm conversing with, like, oh, how do you like having your own practice as opposed to working for another firm? It's like, well, I could see how fun it would be to work at a firm and have that, that built-in system in place already where you don't have to make sure all the PG&E's billed, the rent's billed, and just kind of do your legal thing. But I kind of enjoy having those different hats. It kind of keeps things interesting for me, at least.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Okay, you mentioned something about eating disorders with COVID. So I was going to ask a question, and we could talk a little bit about both, but I was kind of curious, and from what I've seen, it seemed like COVID would be a really good opportunity for people to become healthier, maybe with lifestyle choices, eating habits, because everything you've heard is like, hey, if COVID had hit people really hard who had a lot of these comorbidities that you've talked about, right? Diabetes, weakened immune system. So you would think that, okay, well, aside from maybe getting a vaccine or whatever else, you'd want to maybe take care of your body so COVID doesn't hit you as hard. So are you seeing people who are wanting to come in and say, hey, look, this kind of has woke me up a little bit and I want to make sure I'm overall healthier?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And it wasn't just during the pandemic. I mean, I get a lot of those clients generally, but I think the pandemic definitely sort of gave people the nudge, especially due to a lot of the comorbidities that we saw, the individuals with comorbidities that had worse outcomes when they had COVID, with hypertension and diabetes. So I have seen a large increase in those clients as well. But then going back to like you talked about with the eating disorders, I think the stress of the pandemic could have brought some of that on as well. Eating disorders, just not to get too sidetracked on that, but are a mental health, are a mental illness. And, we don't really know exactly how they get started or where they come from. But, there's some thought that maybe, stressful situations can bring on eating disorder symptoms, or behaviors. So, it does make sense that the pandemic we would see more of that.
Heighten that. I know that's a very broad term of eating disorder, but are you talking people who are maybe overindulging to cope with like the stress, so they're just eating crap because it feels good at the time? Or are you talking about people who are like not eating and like, or bulimic and that type of eating, or both, I guess?
Both. So if we're talking about clinical eating disorders, like anorexia, bulimia, that kind of thing, binge eating disorder, but also people that are just engaging in disordered eating patterns, like going, not eating consistent meals, not eating enough, overdoing caffeine, just engaging in excessive exercise, just disordered behaviors, basically maladaptive behaviors.
Okay. That kind of segues a little bit to one of the things I wanted to talk about today. And it's a term that looks like you've, I don't know if you've coined it, but it seems like it's part of your practice a lot, and that's intuitive eating. Mm-hmm. Define that for us, if you would, and kind of how has that come to fruition, I guess, with COVID and what people are doing?
So intuitive eating is not something I've coined. It's actually an approach to eating, a non-diet approach to eating that was actually developed by 2 dietitians in the mid-90s. And there is a book by the same name, Intuitive Eating, that kind of outlines the theory behind it. And it's based on 10 principles of basically rejecting dieting and diet culture. And when I say diet culture, I mean the multi-billion-dollar industry that is in our society that seeks to promote smaller bodies, basically.
Right.
So rejecting the diet culture, honoring our body's needs, honoring its hunger, honoring its fullness, respecting our body when it needs to rest, gentle movement, and also gentle nutrition in the sense that we are honoring what our body needs for health, but also what our body wants and needs for pleasure and satiety.
That's interesting because, by the way, do you recall off the top who the author of that book is?
Yes, it was two dietitians, Resch and Tribole, and they are fantastic experts in the field of eating disorders. And so this isn't necessarily an eating disorder book. It really is for anybody that has been on and off diets their entire life and just kind of tired of it. It's a really, really wonderful approach to eating without dieting.
Okay. So Intuitive Eating is the name of the book, and the authors again are?
Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch.
Okay. I guess part of what you're saying, it's intuitive to me, and that is, what you feel, if you have a craving and you want to eat for pleasure, it's okay to indulge in that every once in a while. It sounds like is maybe one of the messages of the book, but the intuitive part of the nutritional aspect of it, I don't know that that's necessarily intuitive for most people.
Right. So yeah. And actually, if you look at the way the theory is promoted and written in the book, is that the nutrition piece of it is sort of the last part. That's the last piece of it that we want to work on and really think about. The first piece of it is, or the first steps of it are rejecting the diets, honoring your hunger and fullness, listening to your body's hunger or satisfaction cues. Am I satisfied with what I'm eating? Do I like what I'm eating? Am I eating this because I think I should? Because a certain diet rule told me that I should eat this, or I'm not eating certain foods that I like because I'm told that they're bad for me based on external rules. So the nutrition piece kind of comes at the end once you've gotten familiar with your body's own internal messages. And then when we get to the nutrition piece, we take into account what is important to us as it relates to our health. If we do have health concerns, like let's just say high cholesterol, what are foods that I can enjoy that are going to be health promoting, keeping in mind I have high cholesterol?
Right.
What are foods that I might want to be more mindful of eating less of or not as often because they're going to be, have a negative effect on my blood lipids. So it's not about eat this, not eat that, the black and white rigid rules. It's more really taking into account the individual's values around food, what's important to them, and what feels good to them and what feels manageable to them to do in regards to nutrition.
And do you also consider a person's, age in doing this, and maybe, their athletic paralysis? And obviously someone who's running 20 miles a day probably has different dietary needs than someone who sits at a desk all day.
Yeah, that's a good question, because intuitive eating, isn't necessarily appropriate for everybody at every point in their life. Take, for example, somebody who's recovering from an eating disorder and is very disassociated from their body's cues and hunger, fullness levels, not an appropriate approach for them. For athletes, it can be a little tricky because when you're at a high level of athletic training, hunger cues are often missed or suppressed because of high training levels. So we have to then, when we have situations like that, we have to recognize that our body cues are there, but we may not always be able to hear them. So we have to use our logical mind and say, okay, I may not be hungry now, but I know I just did a 2-hour crazy workout. I need to make sure that I eat to refuel
fuel my body.
So it is kind of a mix of those internal cues, but also knowing logically, cognitively what we need and learning what we need.
And so you picked on a topic that I've been studying a lot lately because I have quote unquote high cholesterol. I guess it's higher than what the blood work is above 200. You're considered high cholesterol. Mm-hmm. But the more research I've done, I've talked to my primary care physician about this, and it's like, dude, you don't need to be on a statin. You're like 230, whatever. I know the BMI, we're gonna get to that a little bit, but he's like, your BMI is fine. Like all your other scores are fine. Like don't let just having a little bit of high cholesterol dictate being on a prescription medication for the rest of your life. And so do you work in conjunction with physicians in determining what's appropriate for each individual patient?
Oh yeah. And I think just then that plays to your point with your physician is you have to look at the whole person, right? It's not just your cholesterol levels. Right. I'm sure your physician's looking at your, like you said, your other health indicators, maybe your family history to determine what your cardiovascular risk is. And with cholesterol, there is a high degree of genetic and familial
predisposition.
Absolutely. So, you could be doing all the quote unquote things right, diet and exercise wise, and you might still have high cholesterol. And it's not because you're doing anything wrong. It's just because, you get dealt a bad hand. I don't know if that's your case.
No, I think that's what it is.
But and that's the other thing too, is I remind people is that food and nutrition is not a magic bullet. I think sometimes we give, and I think people sometimes are surprised to hear me say that as a dietitian, that I think sometimes we give food and nutrition much more importance than they have in our overall health. It's a small part of it. There's so many other things that go into our health, our genetics, our environment, our access to medical care, our access to adequate food to eat,
right?
Access to, places to move our body and exercise. So there's so many things that play into it that I think we don't want to put too much weight and emphasis on food and nutrition. But yes, to answer your question, we would definitely look at the whole person.
Does everyone have the time and luxury to do that? It's almost like I'm blessed to have the ability to have a primary physician that I can, afford and pay for with medical care, or sometimes that medical care doesn't even cover, right? Sometimes I do things that aren't billed through insurance, which I notice I don't think you accept insurance either, right?
No, I don't.
So I get why you have to have some sort of standardized number, right? If you have cholesterol over 200, we're going to say that's high risk, therefore you may want to take this medication, right?
Right.
But that doesn't mean you should, right? Because there's this standardized test that says you fall into this category. And I'm just using myself as an example of that. One of the things he said, well, to make you feel better, I hate to talk about my health, but I just want to use it as an example. But he said, there's this calcium score you can get at the, they do a CT scan of your heart, and they get your calcium score to see kind of what your risk level is for, a heart attack. And my calcium score is 0. I had no calcium buildup. And so he's like,
awesome.
Why would you take a statin? Why would you take a prescribed medication just because your cholesterol is at 230 or whatever? Kind of made me stop and think a little bit. And it's well, yeah, you're right. I don't want to take those. And being educated and talking about this, I don't think I should. But is everybody doing that? Is everyone, taking those extra steps to find out what their needs are, dietary or otherwise? I guess that's why you're here and that's what you do. But is that what you kind of try to promote?
I do, but also, I think it's important to recognize that health is not really a moral imperative. We're not obligated to health. In some regards, it's a choice, and in others, it's not a choice. So
right. It's
somewhere in the middle, right? We're dealt the genetics we're dealt with, and the environment that we live in, but also too, people can choose not to pursue health.
Yeah,
and they have every right to.
No,
and
it's weird coming from you, but
and to be honest, that's something even as a health professional that is trained that we can do all these things to improve our health. It can be really hard to work with a client that doesn't really want to make changes, and that's okay. I mean, I can give them all the information about why making changes are important and why it might be beneficial to their health. But ultimately, the choice is up to the individuals to what they pursue in terms of health.
And that goes down a huge slippery slope, right?
Yeah.
Because if people choose to be unhealthy, right, or choose certain lifestyle choices, aren't we kind of all bearing the cost of that, right? For the cost of insurance and
sure.
I can't remember what podcast it was, but recently I was listening to there was a study that showed if drastic changes aren't made, diabetes alone could bankrupt our healthcare system by 2040. Mm-hmm. And it's okay, well that's kind of scary. I mean, I know some diabetes is genetics, right? You're just dealt with that condition, I guess, especially type 1, but a lot of diabetes is brought on by what you eat, right?
It can be.
What you put in your body.
It can be. Mm-hmm.
And so that's a kind of a slippery, and we've had that conversation with COVID. I've had friends, if they're going to listen to this and they're going to laugh, but they're in New York and they're like, we should charge people more who don't get a vaccine, and we should increase their premiums because they're putting a load on our healthcare system. It's okay, well, what about the people who are choosing to live a certain lifestyle and create healthcare costs out of that way? Should we impose a lifestyle tax on them?
Right. And
it kind of goes down this slippery slope.
It does. And on the flip side, there are aspects, like you mentioned, there are aspects of health that we are blessed to have the choice
right.
in pursuing. There are a lot of people that don't have those choices. So we have to think about that side of the coin too, is that there are people that have access to choices and may choose not to pursue health. And there are people that don't have access to choices such as we do. And what about them?
Well, and that's and where I want to kind of segue a little bit to that is adults 18 and over, like you're an adult, you make your choice, right? It is what it is. But kids, that's where I think education is hugely important. I don't know if you are aware of what goes into how kids are fed at school, but I kind of want to talk a little bit about that. Are dietitians involved in policymaking with respect to what our kids are eating and how we're educating them about how to make these choices early on? Or is that something that it's not part of your job description, I guess?
So I hesitate to dive into this too much because I'll have to dig up stuff from the recesses of my brain from when I was in school. But yes, dietitians are involved in school meal planning. School meals are based on what is served. The components of the meals, at least for federally funded meals, are based on USDA or the U.S. dietary guidelines. So there's that.
Okay.
And dietary guidelines are evidence-based. They are research-based. I know a lot of people disagree with the dietary guidelines, and it's a little bit of a hot button issue.
Right.
But there is research behind it, and there are professionals planning those meals. Now, a lot of times the way those meals look, they may provide the necessary nutrients as required by the school lunch program. It may not come in a package that we think it should, so to speak. There might be a muffin for breakfast that hits all of the nutrient goals for that meal. Some people don't think that the kids should be getting a muffin, for example.
But what does Nicole think? What is Nicole's regimen for feeding our kids in school? Or what do you feed your kids? What?
Well, people will probably be really surprised, but my kids like Eggo waffles and shredded wheat, or shredded mini wheats. So here's my philosophy with child feeding, and I'm going to caveat this by saying I don't see kids really under the age of 12, but I do give a lot of adults that I see. I do give some child feeding guidance because that comes up a lot in sessions with adults. So the one thing, we want kids ultimately to grow up with a good relationship with food and their bodies, to feel good about the bodies they live in and feel good about the food that they eat. We want them to trust their own internal signals of hunger and fullness. So I like to remind parents of the theory of the division of responsibility in child feeding. And this is actually developed by a dietitian/family therapist. Her name's Ellen Satter. You can Google her. She is amazing. She's written a ton of books on child and family feeding. But the division of responsibility sets up that parents are responsible for what and when meals and snacks are served. Kids are responsible for if and when they eat them. So if parents are serving and providing regularly timed meals and snacks, balanced meals and snacks, kids can learn to trust their own hunger and fullness signals. If they decide not to eat lunch, it's fine because they're going to have the snack that's planned. Mm-hmm. If they don't want that snack, it's fine. Dinner's coming at 6. So kids can really learn to regulate their own hunger fullness cues. And this really can help them learn how to avoid overeating and eat enough to satisfy what their needs are. And this is actually something that's even recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics for the prevention of childhood obesity and eating disorders, is really setting up those structured meals within the family mealtime, especially family dinner time, which, not super realistic for a lot of families, but
especially have 2 working parents.
Mm-hmm. Kids with activities. But if you can sit down and have a meal as often as possible, even if that's one day a week, great. Parents modeling behaviors, parents modeling eating a variety of foods, including fruits and vegetables, whole grains, right. Not demonizing any food, not telling kids, oh, we don't want to eat that. That's bad for you. Because then when we're attaching moral value to food, then it sets up the relationship that, not just for kids, but also for adults that, oh, if I eat that food, I've done something bad. Or if I eat this food, I'm really good because I ate that food. So we want to try to avoid that. All food is neutral. Limiting screen time. Oh yeah, that's a biggie, especially during the family meals. Yep. Giving kids opportunity to move their bodies and discover ways that they like to move their bodies, whether that be in sport or just running around in the neighborhood, playing catch in the backyard, walking the dog. But going back to your question about what do I feed my kids? Anything and everything.
Okay. No, I'm curious because we're not Nazis at our house on that. Like we have a dessert every night or something, moderate they can enjoy and they love that. That's the favorite part of whatever. But if they don't eat their dinner, they're not going to get that. So you're saying that's not a good approach. It's like if they're not hungry for dinner, fine, don't eat it, but then let them have their dessert. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. So So this is actually something that is recommended by Ellen Satter's Division of Responsibility that I referenced, that we're not elevating any certain foods over others. Every
that's
food,
so counterintuitive.
It is very counterintuitive. It's really, really hard for people to put into practice.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you have to do it this
Sure.
way.
No, I get it.
But it's something to consider. The idea that all food is neutral and all food is on a level playing field. Yes, obviously we can agree that different foods have different nutrient value. That, obviously. But in terms of moral value or importance in the day, we don't want to make other foods seem more special, more desired, more novel, because then it tends to set up that idea that I need to have as much of this as possible because I don't know when I might get it again. So,
right, like a dog, right?
Yeah.
Feed a dog, they don't know when they're going to eat again. So
exactly.
Yeah.
So one strategy that I've even recommended to people is serve dessert with the meal and don't say a word and see what happens.
See what they eat first and how.
Yeah. And if they eat the cookie first, okay.
Yeah, the timing of it doesn't mean anything.
No. Now with little kids, sometimes you don't want their bellies necessarily to fill up on the cookie. I get it. But if that cookie is always there with their plate of pasta and their green beans, they're probably not always going to eat the cookie first if it's always there.
I guess, yeah, kind of the novelty of it wears off and the allure of it. Then it's like, oh, okay, that's just there. And if I want to, I'll eat it. And maybe they won't eat it. Maybe they're full on everything, something else that they eat.
And as an example, not that, and I don't throw this out there to say that I feed my kids perfectly, because I'm sure that I've made a gazillion mistakes in raising 3 boys. But case in point, last night, we usually have some sort of dessert as well, or something in the house that the kids might want to have for dessert. And last night, one of my boys, he said, I ate way too many chips and salsa. I can barely finish dinner. There's no way I'm eating dessert. And I thought that was great.
Yeah.
He
listened to his body, right?
He was listening to his body. He ate plenty. He was full. Did not want dessert. Didn't even want it later. So.
I don't know if my girls have they have a dessert side, they tell me, and then they have a dinner side. And so the dinner side is always 95% full, but the dessert side seems to be around 0 to 5% pretty regularly.
Yeah, that's okay.
It's fun. I mean, there's so many different ways you can introduce food to your children, how to have a healthy relationship with that. But there's also a lot of information out there, and it wasn't always as readily available as it is right now. And so it's hard for people who aren't educated like you in this field to know what information is good, what information is bad, and how to incorporate that all. So I think it's having a lot of access to information is not always, the key to success. You have to know how to kind of implement that. Okay, I want to go back a little bit to the intuitive eating because we kind of glossed over that a little bit. But getting to the nutrition part, I mean, obviously there's first stages of it that you have to do, and the nutrition comes last. But what does that look like when you're implementing nutritional values into the intuitive eating?
So first of all, we want to look at what's important to that person in terms of their pursuit of health. So if it's, like you said, depending on what their health concerns are, we might, if we're introducing nutrition, for a health concern, we might really start to talk about what the health concerns are, what the evidence is for nutrition therapy for those health concerns, and then asking the person or working with the person to determine what feels manageable. What do you think would be a workable solution to incorporate into your eating pattern or to your lifestyle to manage this? It doesn't feel restrictive or rigid. That is really the most important thing, is that rigidity around food, especially as it relates to that kind of nutrition, intuitive eating nutrition piece, is we don't want it to be rigid. Even for people who do have health concerns, like let's say high cholesterol,
sure.
There's a lot of recommendations that say we want to avoid saturated fats because we know that those saturated fats increase your LDL cholesterol. The LDL is the bad cholesterol that puts you at greater risk for heart disease. Well, if that makes sense for that person, we're going to pursue that. But if that person's like, what, I really enjoy going to have a steak with, my husband on date night once a week, then I'm not going to say don't do that, but we're going to look at other meals in the week or other things that they can incorporate that aren't rigid, that feel again, doable and manageable. It may also be increasing their fiber intake and looking at foods that they enjoy that have higher fiber content. It might be looking at ways to incorporate more movement so that we can get those HDL cholesterol levels up.
The good cholesterol, right?
Exactly, the good cholesterol. So it's gentle approaches. Rather than giving somebody a list of do not eat these foods, eat only these foods. That's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to find that middle ground, less rigid, have it be something that feels a little bit more organic so that it's coming from a little bit more of internal motivation that, this is important to me. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to pursue.
So the doable and manageable part, that's different for every person, right? Because for someone, what's doable and manageable is different than the other person. So do you, I guess goes with everything. There's really no cookie cutter approach if you're doing it correctly, but is that kind of the approach you take? Is you really trying to learn the patient? Because you don't want to set them up for failure, right? You don't want to understand their schedule or their whatever they have going on in their life and say, do this, knowing darn well they're just not going to be able to accomplish that, right?
Right. Yeah, no, that is a big part of my practice. I don't have standard protocols that I give people that I work with and say, oh, you have this problem, do this. That's not how I practice at all. I don't, a lot of times people are disappointed. I don't do meal plans. I don't send people home and say, here, follow this meal plan and it will solve all your problems, because that's not realistic for anybody, really. So what I do try to do is work with them individually, listen to their lifestyle, their schedule, their work habits, their exercise habits, what their family schedule is like. Is it realistic for them to cook at home most nights of the week? And if they are, what kind of meals can we talk about that fit their health goals and are quick and easy? So it is a hugely individualized approach. And I do end up taking a lot of time with clients. I mean, my initial session with clients usually it's 90 minutes long. So,
wow.
And a lot of it is getting to know them and, what's important to them, what their life looks like, and how can we fit, some gentle nutrition in if that's what they want to pursue.
They have to want to pursue it. Otherwise, what's the point of...
Yeah. And even still, I do get clients, I had a client last week that, sat in my office and said, yeah, I know I really need to make all these changes. I know that I need to do these X, Y, and Z for my health, but I just don't know how I'm going to do it right now. And so, you kind of have to roll with that ambivalence, right? Like, I know I need to, but I'm not sure how I'm going to do it. I'm not sure I want to do it. I don't know if it's really the right thing for me now. So, then I just kind of step back and say, okay, well, what can we do right now? Is there anything we can do right now?
And start there.
Yeah. And if they say, no, I don't think I can do anything right now, okay, that's fine. Right. We've given the information and had that discussion. But I got to meet clients where they're at.
And if a client is someone who says, look, I need you to tell me what not to eat and what to eat, because that's just the way my brain works, and I'll do better with that, will you accommodate that? Or is that so, opposite of your practice that you're just like, no, I don't do that? No,
I do. And I do try to work with them and find out, well, what do you like to eat? And then from there, we can start to kind of develop, like you said, maybe a list of things that we're going to try to include more of, or maybe a list of things that maybe we're going to be a little bit more mindful of.
Because it's obviously comparing apples and oranges, but I'll have clients that say, just write a list, tell me what I need to do. And then I don't want to put any thought into it. That's why I hired you. So you tell me what to do. I'm going to go do it. Right. And it's just a personality that some people have, but I imagine it would carry over into what you do as well. If they want to say, look, here's what I want to do. Tell me how to do it, and I'm just going to do it. Yeah, and I like you said, I do that, and a lot of times that might look like, well, okay, if we're going to set a goal of you eating breakfast 3 times a week, what are we going to eat? Okay, let's write this down. We're gonna actually plan out a breakfast meal that you're gonna have 3 days a week. That might be somebody's nutrition prescription for that visit. Right. And you're okay with that? Yeah, because also too, I'm working with them to come up with that strategy and that intervention. Yeah, doing a little reading leading up to the interview today, and you had a couple things on your website I wanted to bring up to you and talk to you about a little bit. One of them is BMI, which stands for Body Mass Index, correct? Yes. Is garbage. and so I want to get your thoughts as to what you mean by that and why. So body mass index, I admit maybe garbage was a harsh term, but I do have very strong feelings about the use of BMI as a health indicator. And I think oftentimes it is used to indicate somebody's health or at least to give a quick assessment of health. When was it created? When was it created and why? And I think that may be So it was originally developed by a mathematician, statistician who was looking to compare the
the sizes of European men. He was a European guy, and this was back in, I believe, the 1700s, 1800s. I'm probably getting my dates wrong.
Long time ago.
A long time ago. Not part of modern medicine.
Right. Back when you would put a leech on somebody and
exactly,
you're cured. Okay,
exactly, yeah. Or bloodletting, you know, that sort of thing.
Right.
So he was looking at trying to measure what the average man, what their size, the average white man.
Okay.
Just wanted to throw that in there too. No women were included, no people of color, no other ethnicities. And
so it's very limited, obviously, in its scope.
Very limited. And really it is just it looks at the height and weight of a person. That's it. It takes those two factors into account. It doesn't take into account age, body type, body composition, because obviously we know muscle mass, lean tissue weighs more than adipose tissue. So
someone like The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, he would maybe have a high BMI.
He potentially could have a high BMI.
Just absolutely shredded.
So where the problem lies with the BMI is that we have these categories of BMI that have been decided upon that rank the BMI number in underweight, normal weight, overweight, obesity based on BMI. And a lot of times if somebody has a BMI that falls in, say, an overweight or obese category, they may be prescribed weight loss. And to be prescribed a weight loss intervention with just looking at BMI.
Right, without even seeing the person.
Right. May or may not be the best approach.
Okay, so you're saying you can use it as a diagnostic tool would be the garbage part, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of it. I know a lot, health insurance companies look at BMI.
Life insurance companies
look
tables.
Yes. And there is some research that shows higher, BMIs at either end of the spectrum, the low end or the high end, there is greater mortality risks. But in the middle, we've got a little bit of everything. Yes, we have diseases that happen across all ranges of the BMI. People can have diabetes and be a normal BMI. People can have diabetes and be overweight and obese. Pretty much every disease that is associated with higher BMIs also happens in lower BMIs. So to make the assumption that just because somebody has a higher BMI that they're not healthy or that they have some sort of comorbidity wouldn't be correct.
Okay. And that kind of goes into another thing that you said in reviewing your webpage is that weight is not a good indicator of health.
Right.
And that's kind of counterintuitive too, right? I mean, if someone is 300 pounds, I would lead to believe that they're not healthy, but you're saying, no, I disagree with that.
Well, we just can't know.
Okay.
We can't know just looking at the weight. And just kind of going back to the illustration that you used with your physician, looking at all kinds of metrics. We can't just look at weight and BMI and make an assumption on somebody's health. Yes, I know a lot of people say, but aren't there a lot of studies that show that if you're a higher body weight, you're more likely to have comorbidities like diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, blah, blah, blah. Yes, a lot of those studies do correlate weight with comorbidities, but we know correlation does not always equal causation.
Right. Especially people who aren't overweight, right? Because you could still have diabetes, hypertension, being, 150, 60 pounds or whatever that number is.
Absolutely. And also too, so you really just have to look at the whole picture, right? And in fact, I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine who is an orthopedic surgery PA, physician assistant. And we were having this conversation about BMI. And she was talking about how some of the surgeons she works with, have real hesitancy with doing elective joint replacements on individuals with higher BMIs because of poorer outcomes. And I asked her, I was like, well, I'm kind of curious, do those poorer outcomes with higher BMIs, do those people also have comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension, or is it just BMI? And she said, no, actually, it's the comorbidities. So not saying that the BMI is causing those comorbidities, but just that those poor outcomes from surgery are not because of their weight necessarily, but because of maybe poorly controlled diabetes or hypertension. And that, again, going back to, we have to look at the whole person, that the weight may not be the only thing that we want to look at.
No, I'm playing devil's advocate because I tend to agree with what you're saying, but I think it goes kind of back to what we were talking a little about earlier. Like it's, not everyone's going to go, get regular healthcare checkups. Not everyone's going to go see a nutritionist or a dietitian. Not everyone's going to exercise. Not everyone's going to do what they're supposed, quote unquote, supposed to do. So it seems like it's a way just to, kind of catch all net. Like, hey, if you have too high of a BMI or if you're this much overweight or consider obese, then, you're probably unhealthy and therefore you need to make some changes. It seems like it's just an easier way to kind of, don't want to say like give advice, but it's an easier way to give people information without each person having this like tailored healthcare plan, I guess.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I don't know if I'm right or wrong. It just seems like it correlates that way, like.
It could, but I really, really struggle with just giving mass blanket advice or struggle with hearing even mass blanket advice being given to just, if you have a high BMI, lose weight and you'll be healthier. Because weight loss in and of itself is really we could go down a whole rabbit hole with that. We don't really, really have good evidence on how somebody can lose weight and keep it off beyond 5 years.
Right.
And oddly enough, people who have gone on diets will recognize this. They've probably experienced this, is that the number one predictor of future weight gain is actually going on a diet.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the vast majority of people who do go on a diet for weight loss do gain that weight back within 5 years, and oftentimes gain more weight back.
So would it be better to instead to focus again on maybe education and preventing that extra weight from going on in the first place? Yes. So that's why,
obviously we do want to promote physical activity,
healthy eating,
to the best of the person's ability to eat healthy. Obviously that goes back to access to food and that sort of thing. But yeah, prevention is good. Absolutely. But also too, I think rather than promoting weight loss, maybe for some people, just weight stabilization and promoting healthy behaviors is the way to go. Again, moving your body more, eating more fruits and vegetables, getting good sleep, stress management, really looking at behaviors that are health promoting rather than a number on the scale. Because I like to remind my clients that weight isn't a behavior.
Yeah, no, I see that. And then again, it goes, but everyone's different too. I mean, I know people who can literally eat McDonald's three times a day and not gain weight.
Genetics, right?
I mean, it's just...
Our bodies are all different.
Right.
We all metabolize food differently.
Right.
You and I could eat the exact same food and we could do the exact same exercise. We would look and weigh and have different body composition. It just goes back to all bodies are not meant to be the same.
Right.
We're not meant to look the same. I look at dogs,
Right.
They're all big, small. We love them.
Right. That's true. So I don't want to keep going back to like education and kids, but there seems to be some middle ground in, we'll call it prevention of, healthy eating habits or not putting on too much weight. Because if we know once you put it on, it's hard to get it off. And if you do, you end up gaining it back within 5 years or more. But how do you have that side of it? And then also have the same side of it. It's like, well, we want to have a healthy relationship with food, trust your instincts, and do this more intuitive thing. If that intuition is leading to maybe problems down the road, I guess, where do you come in and say, okay, look, I get we want to try to be neutral on this, but hey, eventually we got
that's a big question.
We got to put the foot down.
I think it just goes back to, I don't like to use the term moderation because I think it gets overused in the nutrition and exercise space. But I think the more people can reject that diet mentality and diet culture and really get back to what is fueling them well. I like to say that you are well nourished when you're eating foods that support your health goals and that make you feel good physically and emotionally, and that you're eating enough, period.
Even if that is maybe food that's not necessarily high in nutritional value.
Hopefully they might support your health goals too. Well, I throw that in there.
Well, it's good to have, everyone loves to indulge in whatever. I'm not.
Yeah, it's important to not have a rigid approach to food and eating. But it is, I understand, I don't know that there's a simple, easy answer, and even the idea of eating intuitively and following that sort of approach to eating is somewhat of a privileged approach.
Sure.
It assumes that you have access to adequate food.
Right.
That goes down a whole nother road.
Right. And it also assumes that you're probably if you're making those choices, you're probably in a good socioeconomic state. And you probably are comfortable with your, whatever that BMI or how much you weigh, whatever it is, you're probably generally pretty healthy. And you're just like, okay, I'll intuitive eat because I'm not overweight, or I don't have diabetes, or I don't have hypertension. So it's easier to kind of...
Well, you still can be an intuitive eater, even if you are in a larger body or have those health concerns, right? We just wrap that gentle nutrition piece of it into it. Remember that gentle nutrition is about not being rigid about food.
Yeah, that's what, I mean, mine's going to, it seems like this whole gentle nutrition, seems like we need a hammer. But that's not what you're saying.
It's a different approach.
Right.
It's a different approach. It's getting rid of that rigidity and really thinking about what honors your health, but also, I guess, to say honors your taste buds.
So if someone came to you and said, hey, I'm looking to, improve my health. Here's some of the things that I have going on with me, but I'm not going to stop eating red meat. Are you going to intervene and say, look, that's not good? Or do you roll with it? I mean, how do you...
All of the above. I do roll with it.
Inform and then roll with, I guess?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I do like to let people know, okay, if, here's the thing about red meat. It's, like we said, saturated fat, LDLs, heart disease, give them all that information and then they can make an educated choice. I'm not, and that's my approach. I don't like to tell people what to eat, frankly. I really don't.
That's why you don't do meal plans.
Yeah. But I like to make sure that people understand that, okay, here's the science behind it, behind what your health concerns are or what your health issue is. And now you get to make the decision. They may say, and here's an example. I had a client once who had a couple drinks a day and did have a cardiovascular history. And those few drinks a day were not helpful, not doing any favors, not willing to change. No, I don't want to give that up. Okay, now there may be some secondary issues there, but just to illustrate that you can still give somebody the information, they can still choose not to pursue that. So then we say, well, if you're not willing to give up red meat, what else can we do? Are there ways that we can increase your fiber intake? Because we know soluble fiber will help with decreasing cholesterol levels too. Are there ways that we can get some exercise in more regularly to help with those HDL cholesterol? So we'll, kind of find a backdoor way in.
Gently, I guess.
Gently. And then, sometimes people start to make some changes. Maybe they're very small, and that will get the ball rolling. And
sometimes those small changes have profound effects later on.
Exactly.
Just getting the momentum started, I guess.
Sure.
You talked about the whole diet industry being a multi-billion-dollar industry, which it is. It's huge. But there's also other competing interests in everything that we do, right? So sugar has a lobby, milk has a lobby, or dairy has a lobby, meat has a lobby. Now vegans have a lobby. I mean, everyone has a lobby of interest. And so kind of goes into, okay, who are paying for all these studies? Who's promoting these studies? Whose agendas are what? Now we're talking about sustainability and different farming practices and all these things now are starting to come into like, okay, we have all these competing interests, right? From your perspective, how do you kind of look at who's pushed? I'm going to give you a perfect example. Have you seen those Impossible Burgers?
Yes.
How they make those and stuff? Yeah. I would not put that in my body for any amount of money. But yet it's like promoted as this like most healthy, carbon footprint neutral, it's like, well, I don't know, man, that seems kind of counterintuitive to me. So how do you sort through all that mess? It can be hard when there's a lot out there. Just to your point about, all the nutrition information and easily accessible information and how do we decipher what's good, what's bad, and how do we assimilate to, what's important to us. But and just going back to the Impossible Burgers, I would have to agree with you. I've never had one, not interested, just doesn't sound appealing. But interestingly enough, what a lot of people don't realize is that nutrition profile of that Impossible meat or the Beyond Burger meat, whatever it is, it
is very similar to a red meat. So if there's somebody that is concerned about saturated fat intake, that might not be a good choice because it's still as high in saturated fat as its animal counterpart.
Right.
So again,
without all the other stuff that you get from the animal, right? The iron, the B12,
there is, I think that they have found a way to get a lot of those nutrients in. I need to go back and look at those labels, but it goes back to, and here's where that kind of gentle nutrition piece goes in, is what's important to you and what's informing your food choices. If you are choosing that Impossible Burger because you really care about the environment and that is the most important thing in your food choices, then maybe that is a good choice for you. If you're concerned about your heart health, maybe not a good choice.
Right. But they have an interest, right? They're promoting something, right? Obviously it's a business. It's a huge business now. These what do they call them?
The lobbies or the...
No, the alternative meats, I guess, is it?
Yes. Yes.
Because there's alternative cheese, there's alternative everything now.
The nut cheeses.
Right. Or calling oat milk, I guess, right? There's all these, so I guess what I was going with is that really environmentally sound though? All the processing that goes into it and all the, I don't know, it seems like it is pushing a narrative that kind of gets people what they want to hear, but at the same time, it's not really meeting those goals.
Yeah, it could. And I can't speak to, how environmentally sound all of those practices are from a manufacturing standpoint. But yeah, I think we have to ask too, if something is really far removed from its natural state,
mm-hmm.
how much energy has gone into producing that? And,
right.
Is it better to just eat the real thing?
Right. Well, because the reason I asked, because I remember last time we interviewed you, and I think we had you out at, for our whole office, you came out to Stockdale and gave mm-hmm. We had a lunch seminar, which was great, by the way. Highly recommend anyone does that. It's fun for the office and it's just a great way to have a fun conversation and learn mm-hmm. at the same time while enjoying lunch. Loved it. But anyway, you said something that stuck with me. It was like whole foods, like eat whole foods, fruits, vegetables, lean meat. It was just very like holistic kind of like, yeah, that resonated with me. I liked hearing that. All this processed stuff does not seem to be whole foods, right? So
yeah. So processed foods have a place, and I don't want to demonize even by saying, whole foods. Yeah. I think it would be great if more people ate whole foods. I think generally.
Would anybody disagree with that? I mean, is there any?
I don't think anybody can disagree with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's pretty good blanket advice. If you have the ability to get whole foods and eat more of them, great, do it.
Right.
But here's the thing is processed foods do have a place. And, processed foods is it's a big umbrella term.
How processed, right?
How processed.
Right.
Exactly. So, when I talk to athletes and we're talking about fueling during an endurance event, you better believe they're going to be fueling with a ton of processed foods, sports gels and gummies and hydration, electrolyte beverages.
Right.
Those are all very processed foods. And in the context of an athletic event, completely appropriate.
Because you're burning them as quickly as they're going in, right?
Exactly. Now, and if we talk about frozen fruits and vegetables, those are a processed food. Are those appropriate? Yeah, because they're more convenient. They're not going to go bad. They're sometimes more expensive. You can get things, very, very peak of season fresh and have accessible all the time in your freezer.
But that's a spectrum, right? I mean,
there's
frozen fruits seems pretty minimally processed, right?
Yeah. And then, those sports nutrition products would be more processed,
right.
Or, chicken nuggets would probably be more processed. But here's the thing that I do like to remind people. Again, we want to make sure that all foods are on a level playing field. And we're not going to elevate or demonize any particular food because at some point.
I want you to demonize something.
I know you do.
But you're not going to. All right.
I'm not. I'm sorry. At some point, every food has its place. Right? At the end of the day, if you eat a chicken nugget, if we were to compare a chicken nugget to a chicken breast, that protein that your body gets, your body doesn't know if it comes from a chicken nugget or a nice grilled lean chicken breast.
Right.
If you're eating a cupcake, your body doesn't know that the carbohydrate or the sugar that you got from that cupcake, if it came from a cupcake or a banana.
Right.
So to some extent, it is simple like that. It does become a little bit more complex if we have health concerns because, you might want to keep some of those things in mind. But at the end of the day, your body doesn't know the difference. Once we have metabolized them and they are down to their, bare macronutrients, then they all look the same.
Yeah. I'm going back to the last time you were on and then also the talk we had at Stockdale when we had that lunch with the office. I wish I remember the exact quote, but you were describing kind of an ideal plate of colors. Mm-hmm. I can't remember what percentage or breakdown it was, but do you recall that? And is your philosophy kind of changed on that? Is it, the greens, you got your reds and
yeah. So, and just to kind of make meal planning simple for most people, it's a great idea to try to emphasize more plants on your plate. So if you were to have half of your plate or half of your meal, whatever the case may be, fruits and vegetables, mm-hmm. fruits and or vegetables, depending on the context or the meal. Quarter of your plate, a protein source, quarter of your plate, some sort of starchy carbohydrate, a whole grain, and then having some fats as part of that either as a condiment or in the preparation of the food. So that just kind of gives people an easy visual on a plate of, what things to incorporate. And I think it makes it easy to conceptualize that when you're planning a meal. Okay, we're going to grill some steak or we're going to grill some fish and we're going to have some brown rice and we're going to throw some avocado on it and we're going to have a big salad on the side. Done.
Got it. You keep saying fruits or vegetables. Can you go is it okay to say I'm going to have my proteins and some good rice and fruit and no vegetables?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I would never.
You're so easy to do. Yeah, sure, it's great. Lovely.
Well, I could give another very dietitian-y answer with it.
Okay.
It depends.
Okay.
It depends.
That's like a Laurely answer.
Yeah.
It depends. Yeah.
I don't think it's a good idea to exclude either.
Okay.
But if you go a couple days and you haven't had a vegetable, but you've eaten, fruit with just about every meal, I mean, that's probably not the end of the world. Variety is the key.
Mm-hmm.
Variety is the spice of life. But
is that sustainable long term?
Which part? Variety?
The say like you just like, look, I'm just going to go with fruits, proteins, and some nice whole grains, and that's it.
Well, it doesn't have to look like that all the time, And
No, if you do, I'm asking if someone makes that choice.
Yeah, they could.
Okay.
I don't say why not.
Okay.
But, if you want to go eat a pizza, that can still count. You've got that starchy carbohydrate, grain.
Right.
It may not be a whole grain. It doesn't always have to be a whole grain. Remember, we're not trying to be super rigid here.
No, I know.
We're putting some flexibility.
You could tell I'm pretty rigid. I'm having to
we got to get you to loosen up and be more flexible.
Yep.
But, even pizza, grain. We have got a grain. We've got maybe throw some vegetables on there. We got some protein. We got some fats.
Right.
You can make it work with just about anything.
And are you talking about like a homemade pizza with like fresh ingredients, or are you talking about like Domino's where it's processed and preserved?
Both.
And okay.
Both.
Gosh, I can't get you to budge. I did kind of get you on the Impossible Burgers. You're definitely not keen on
for me
eating those personally.
And like I said, it depends. It depends.
It depends.
I'm not totally against it. I personally don't want to eat them, but again, if it's somebody else's values and health goals.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay. Do you have a lot of clients who are either vegetarian and or vegan? And
yes.
Is that easy or harder to kind of incorporate nutritional advice and or?
It does make things a little bit more challenging, but it is absolutely possible to put together a healthy eating pattern without animal products. Okay. One thing that's really great about our food supply now, we do have some processed foods that make it easy, not Impossible Burgers, but I'm talking about milk alternatives that are fortified with nutrients that you might previously could only get from dairy milk. So like calcium, vitamin D, you can get soy milk and almond milk and oat milk that are fortified with those nutrients. So if somebody doesn't consume animal products, they can still get those nutrients through food. We can also get wonderful proteins from plants, from beans, from soy. So, there's plenty of protein there. So the only nutrient that we really have a hard time with people who are vegan or vegetarian is vitamin B12, because that only comes from animal products. So you really want to make sure that you're either eating some supplement or fortified foods or supplementing it with a multivitamin. That has a lot of B12 in it. Yeah, that has B12.
Because B12 deficiency it definitely leads to some, from my understanding, some pretty long-term health consequences.
It is kind of a rare deficiency because B12, our body does hold on to it, and we don't need a lot of it from food to get enough. But yes, we do. And especially when people get older, we don't just see deficiencies of B12 in vegans or vegetarians, but as people get older, elderly people can sometimes have lower B12 levels because their absorption of B12 from their diet tends to decrease with age.
Oh, okay. So it's not just vegans or vegetarian. It's also as we get older. Okay.
But typically a basic multivitamin takes care of that.
And you mentioned plants. Obviously, you can get a lot of ample protein, right? Plant protein. But are you getting the same amino acids, or do you have to supplement?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes. So for people that are looking to consume more plant protein, soy products are an excellent substitute for animal products because they have the same essential amino acids that animal products would have, or animal proteins. So that's my go-to recommendation, that if you're not eating animal meat, definitely include soy in your diet.
And that could be like?
That would be tofu, soy milk,
edamame,
tempeh, edamame, which is the soybean.
Yeah, which is really good, by the way.
Really good.
Japanese restaurants, they put the garlic on there.
Yeah.
It's delicious.
Yeah.
We talked about a little bit about the market of dieting. Do you think there's any good motives in pushing a diet on somebody, or do you think any type of dieting is strictly profit driven and just different players involved from whatever side you're coming from?
Well,
because I'm thinking like Jenny Craig, I'm thinking keto. I mean, all these things we get inundated with.
So if we think about what a diet is, it's a set of rules that somebody follows for the pursuit of shrinking their body or for the purpose of shrinking their body, right? And if we're doing that, we're not listening to our own internal cues. In fact, that just starts to erode trust in our body's internal cues. A lot of times those kinds of diets or, even messages from diet culture tell us to ignore those cues. Oh, if you're hungry, drink some water, chew some gum, go for a walk and ignore your hunger signals. Don't eat.
Now, that seems like bad advice.
Yeah, but it's advice that's given all the time.
Yeah, if you're hungry,
that means something.
Yeah, your body's telling you, look, I need something, so feed me.
Right. Now, but that's the thing is that diets tend to have a set of rules. And a lot of times it's eat this, not that, eat at this time, not at this time, don't eat past this time. So a lot of those rules, again, erode trust in our own body and our body's needs. And, when people talk about ignoring their hunger signals, it's a little bit of a funny analogy, but, you wouldn't ignore the urge to go to the bathroom.
Right.
And that's exactly,
some consequences if you do. But,
exactly.
Right.
Well, there's consequences to ignoring your hunger,
right?
And you would never say, well, I went to the bathroom too much yesterday. I'm going to really try to do it less today.
Hold back on that today.
Yeah. So,
the same thing with thirst, right?
Right.
Ignoring your thirst. Like if you want some water. No. You got to.
Yeah. I had too much yesterday.
Right.
I'm not going to have any more water today.
Right.
So, it's kind of silly, but it's really the same. Those cues from our body to do, those other body signals are just like our hunger cues. It is a signal that our body's energy is low. We have a blood sugar drop. We've got hormone signals that are telling us that we need energy. We need calories from food. So, if we can really tune in and listen to that, now there's a lot of things that we might not happen that might not enable us to hear those cues. Diet rules, we'll ignore them. Being busy, being stressed. A lot of times people will say, well, I'm just not hungry during the day because I'm so busy. And I'm like, well, your body actually is hungry, but you're probably not listening to those cues. Or maybe you just don't recognize those hunger cues.
Or suppress it with, say, a lot of caffeine or...
Exactly. So that's when, it can be really helpful to say, recommend, why don't we try eating breakfast? Why don't you try setting aside a quick lunch and making sure that you're having dinner when you get home, and see what happens if you were to actually feed your body regularly rather than just let the whole day go by. Because sometimes those hunger cues are hard to hear. And
are you an expert on like metabolism, how our bodies metabolize food, and is that part of?
Yeah.
Okay, so this sounds maybe a stupid question then, but changing your diet all the time and introducing new things and going on this diet and that diet and ignoring your hunger pains and all that. Mm-hmm. Does that have an effect on your metabolism?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Especially if we're not feeding our body adequate energy. We have our resting metabolism, and then we have, what the amount of energy that our body needs at rest. Like if you were to lay in bed all day, right. Our body needs energy for your brain to function, your eyes to blink, your heart to beat, your gastrointestinal tract to function, all of those things. Red blood cell production requires energy. And that's actually the vast majority of our calorie needs go to just keeping us alive. Very little of it is actually expended in our physical activity and digesting food. So if you were to actually eat less than your body needs to survive, or than your body needs to function or requires, what's going to happen? Well, you might experience weight loss initially, but then your body's going to go, oh, wait a minute here. What's going on? We're getting less. We're going to start to become very efficient.
We're going to store this.
We're going to get by on less.
Oh.
We slow things down. And that's when digestion can slow down. A lot of other body processes just start to slow down because it's conserving energy.
Your body's smart then.
Very smart.
Right.
So what happens then when you go off that diet and you're back to eating,
whatever you
wanted?
Right.
Well, now your metabolism has been a little bit suppressed, and now your body's like, oh, I'll save all this for later.
Right.
And then it goes into more fat storing mode.
So it can have the absolute opposite effect of what you're intending.
Yeah, exactly. And that goes back to why one of the best ways that we can predict future weight gain is people going on diets, especially highly restrictive diets.
Right. You mentioned something about eating at a certain time. Are you like okay having dinner at 10 o'clock and hopping into bed? Is that if you're hungry, or?
It depends.
That's going to be that's the title of this episode is It Depends.
It depends on a lot of things.
Right.
If you...
Generally,
I am always concerned that people are getting enough to eat. Are you getting adequate energy throughout the day? Mm-hmm. And if eating that dinner at 10 o'clock means that you're going to be getting adequate energy to satisfy your needs, then yes, eat it. But if eating that dinner at 10 o'clock means you're going to be laying in bed suffering from heartburn and reflux, and feeling like crap, like maybe we need to, try to adjust some things. But as it relates to the whole idea that we shouldn't be eating past a certain time, our body does have somewhat of an internal clock, the whole circadian rhythm, all that, we are sort of in shutdown mode once the sun sets. And there is some research, especially animal studies, that look at, eating less later in the day might be helpful in managing weight and all that. But again, I go back to, if you're hungry, eat. Especially
if you did any sort of exercise that day at all, right? I mean, if you did any type
maybe you had a long work day, and then
right.
your kid had a soccer game, and then you had to throw some laundry in, and it's 9 o'clock by the time you're sitting down to finally eat something. I would never say,
it's too late.
It's too no, eat
and enjoy.
Yeah, although if heartburn is an issue, you might want to think about what you're eating.
Right. Maybe don't eat chocolate and red wine.
Yeah, maybe not a big, heavy meal.
Fatty fried foods.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do a little Q&A if you don't mind. Just kind of rapid fire, throw some things at you. You looking at your notes?
No.
Just kidding. Okay, life hacks, biohacks, right? That's a big kind of topic that or at least for me, I hear it all the time on all the podcasts I listen to. MCT oil, have you heard of it? And
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I got on this little kick of I'm just going to take some MCT oil every night before I go to bed. Fuel for the brain. Thoughts?
Okay, so our brain's preferred fuel source is actually glucose, which comes from carbohydrates. And
Correct.
So MCT oil, yes, we can use for fuel. We do use fats as fuel. I would say there's probably no harm in it.
Okay.
I'm not a huge fan.
Okay.
MCT oil is metabolized slightly different than other fats, and that's why it's promoted as being a little bit of a healthier fat, but it's not something that I would routinely recommend.
Okay, because my understanding was I think fuel for the brain is either glucose or ketones, right?
Yes. So ketones when there's not enough glucose, and that is a survival mechanism, an adaptation that our body has when we don't have enough glucose, is we do utilize fats for fuel. That's not really a preferred state.
So it's not preferred.
It's not a preferred state.
Okay. What about a tablespoon of honey before bed?
Well, if it fits within your energy needs and it tastes really good, go for it. Again, I would go back to why.
Okay.
That's the intention behind the behavior is a biggie.
Okay. Well, so we had a gentleman on our podcast about a month ago now, and he was talking about adrenaline dominance. Mm-hmm. And in one of his premises is that adrenaline production will disrupt sleep and so on and so forth. So one of his ways of doing that was one, eat some side of like honey or MCT oil or before bed, so it provides fuel for your brain, and then using progesterone cream to stop that adrenaline overproduction. So picking what I heard from him and seeing what you're curious or thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, and I would agree, that living in that constant fight or flight mode is not a good place to be in. And actually that does stimulate, there's some, we know that does stimulate an increase in those fight or flight hormones, particularly cortisol, and that can actually be a fat storage hormone. So yes, there's something to that. Typically for evening snacks, I usually recommend something that's a little bit higher in protein with a carbohydrate, just for that sustained energy. And especially people who exercise, work out a lot, or maybe trying to maximize body composition or increasing their lean mass, something that's got leucine, some branched chain amino acids to help with that muscle protein synthesis overnight. So I go for a more protein snack.
Okay.
That would be my recommendation. But
you said protein with some carb?
Protein with a little bit of carb, so
Give me an
maybe
example.
like some Greek yogurt with some berries on top.
Okay. Actually, that sounds good right now.
Yeah.
I'm hungry. All right. Next quick Q&A. Milk, dairy milk, right? Mm-hmm. Low fat, non-fat, whole milk. What's the difference? All the same.
Well, the higher fat dairy, whole fat dairy is going to be higher in saturated fat. Protein, carbohydrate content's going to be pretty similar. So
calcium, same.
Calcium, you're going to get a little bit of difference between the different fat contents just because of what's been filtered out. But in general, the biggest difference is going to be fat and calorie content. So depending on your health goals, children under the age of 2, they want to be giving them whole milk because they need those fat calories for growth and development. For most children, adolescents, and adults, it's not really necessary to drink whole milk. Low fat, non-fat. 1%.
Would you say is it necessary to drink milk at all?
You can definitely get calcium from other sources. Milk is probably the easiest source for us to get adequate calcium and vitamin D, particularly vitamin D, because it is hard to get enough of it from food. We also can get it from the sunshine. We can synthesize vitamin D on our skin. So it's an easy, somewhat inexpensive source of that nutrient. It can be a little bit harder to get from other foods. We can get it from some vegetables, some leafy greens. You can get it from tofu, from fortified beverages like orange juice.
Right.
So I would say no, you don't have to drink milk. You just have to be a little bit more aware of what other foods contain calcium and try to include those in your diet more regularly.
Okay. You mentioned a lot about fortified foods, right? Or
Fortified
beverages.
foods,
Yeah. Or what did I say? Fortified. Going back, did your body not know the difference between getting D3 naturally from whole milk or from cow's milk versus like getting supplemented into a orange juice drink? I mean,
no,
not
really.
Chemical.
It's the same. If it's D3, it's pretty much the same. I always recommend trying to get those nutrients from a food source rather than a pill type supplement, because you get a lot more benefit if you're getting it from foods. There's other nutrients that you're getting, especially, antioxidants, phytochemicals in fruits and vegetables. And with supplements, it's a lot easier to get too much, and sometimes too much isn't a good thing. So yeah, I would say if you're looking to get more of certain nutrients in your diet, try the food first approach first. And if it's a fortified food, like a fortified plant milk or a juice or something like that, then that's perfectly fine.
And they're called supplements, right? So they're meant to supplement, not replace.
Exactly.
I think. And so I think supplementing your diet with supplements is different than like, oh, okay, I'm going to take a D3 pill and then never eat anything with D3 in it.
Right.
I think that's what you're saying. Probably not the best way to.
And it also too depends. I never recommend a supplement unless through dietary assessment we see that okay, we're just not eating these foods, and maybe we're not doing the best at incorporating these foods in our diet, or maybe we've got some lab work that says we're low in something. Then it might be a good idea to use supplements. But yeah, generally, and really, most healthy people don't really need supplements from a pill, because if you're getting a variety of foods in your diet from all food across all food groups, you're likely getting adequate amounts of everything you need.
That kind of ruins my next question, but I think I know the answer to it. So there's no supplements in Nicole's cabinet in her house then?
I do sometimes take a D3 if I think about it.
Okay.
Sometimes I take an omega-3 if I haven't been eating a lot of fish.
Vitamin C?
Nope.
No?
You get a lot of that from fruits and vegetables.
Okay.
So if you're including those in your diet, you're getting plenty.
Okay.
And occasionally a multivitamin, but usually not.
Oh, interesting. And for kids, what do you think about kids' multivitamins?
I don't think there's anything wrong with a kid's multivitamin. And, like I said, not a pediatric dietitian, but certain age groups do require supplement. Infants usually need a vitamin D supplement, unless they're formula fed. But yeah, in general, a vitamin is not a bad idea for most kids. There's no real harm in it.
Right.
But again, if they're not doing it, you don't necessarily need to start. If you're getting a lot of variety in your diet, you're most likely getting everything you need.
And like you said, that's kind of a privilege to have that, right? Not everyone can have access to good quality supplements, can afford them. And so I get why you wouldn't want to like blanketly start saying like, yes, everyone needs to take this supplement, because it's not really
realistic.
It's feasible. Yeah. What is something about you that nobody knows?
Well, a few people know this about me, but
that's not nobody.
Well, a few people.
Okay. Very few know about you.
Okay. My first job ever was at Taco Bell.
Oh, that's perfect. Do you still eat Taco Bell? No, I got to ask you.
Yes.
I love Taco Bell. That's my favorite fast food place.
I do like Taco Bell.
What do you get there?
Well, I really just like the basic bean burrito.
Okay.
Or one of their power bowls. Those are pretty good.
Oh, I like the grilled stuffed chicken burritos, which you don't have anymore, and then the double deckers, which I think they've taken off the menu as well.
Yeah, they keep changing the menu.
It's like, why can't you just go get a Mexican pizza and a double decker?
I know. Stick with what works.
Right. All right. What is a quote you live by?
Life begins at the end of your comfort zone. Don't know who said it, but it is definitely my life mantra.
Okay, hold on. Let me process that. Life begins at the end of your comfort zone.
Yes.
Okay. That's a nice way to live. Kind of an adventurous one.
Yeah. So, and also too, it just means, doing something that maybe scares you a little bit. Maybe you feel like might be a little risky, keeping safety in mind, of course. Right. But, saying yes to things that maybe you're not sure about.
Live outside your comfort zone, basically, then. Or be willing to try new things.
Yeah,
kind of
I think a lot of growth can happen if you're willing to try new things, new experiences.
Yeah, I like that. All right. Book or books that you recommend?
So I have two that I really love. One you're probably familiar with, Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson.
I'm not.
Oh, I figured because you're a lawyer.
No.
Heard of it.
Tell me about it.
Written by an attorney. It's just a really eye-opening book, an account of his experiences as an attorney for the, I'm going to butcher this, Equal Justice.
Like for the Innocence Project?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And it just looks at the flaws in the justice system.
Oh, which we could...
Yeah, that's a whole nother episode,
Man,
right? But it's fascinating. It's fascinating. And it really was eye-opening for me to read. And the other one that is a little bit more in my lane is called Body Respect by Dr. Lindo Bacon. And it just talks about how, weight is not health and all the things that go into our weight, kind of debunks some myths about weight and health. And again, it looks very evidence-based, looks at the research. It's written by an internationally renowned expert on weight science. So that's one that I think can be really eye-opening for people as well.
Is it an easy read, or is it more of a...
I mean, I think it's
you have to go to
read. No, it's not a
law
heavy.
School to read.
No, it's not a heavy scientific read. It is
Okay.
written for the layperson.
Okay.
It's not necessarily a professional level book at all.
Okay. And they have it on audio?
I think so. Okay. Both you can find easily.
Do you read paperback books still?
Yeah.
I wish I can. I just can't because, well, one, I'd read all day, every day for my job, and then law school and undergrad just kind of turned me off of actually reading paper books. It's just, it's like I think PTSD or something.
Yeah. I do like a book, but I have started reading on a Kindle occasionally just because it's convenient.
Yeah. The audio is great though, because it's kind of, for me, it's like a podcast. I could go in the car and like, it's just a great way to spend 20 minutes or 30 minutes. I'm running some errands,
Yeah.
As opposed to listening to music. And I mean, sometimes I like to do that and just kind of turn my mind off, but
right.
I like to use those times to like educate myself and learn as much as possible. So,
yeah.
Well, I sure thank you for spending the time coming back in and talking to me again. If anyone wants to reach out to you with more questions or maybe to utilize your services, I know you mentioned a webpage, which I should have it in front of me, but I don't. What's the webpage?
It's www.NicoleGiumarra.com.
You want to spell your last name?
Giumarra.
Okay. And the same on Instagram?
Yep.
All right.
Actually, it's Nicole Giumarra _RDN.
RDN, Registered Dietitian
Nutritionist.
Very good.
Yes.
Well, thanks again for coming. It's nice to see you.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
This show has been brought to you by the Law Office of Kyle Jones, Troy Burton with the Lynn Company, CPA John Duffield, Scott Hansen Real Estate Lender, Broker and Investor, and Shannon Eckroth with the Eckroth Sales and Marketing Agency, LLC. You've been listening to the Our 2 Cents podcast. Check out the show notes for links and more information about the show. Also visit our website at our2centspodcast.com or catch us on Instagram at Our 2 Cents Podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe